You were tired of rehearsing beginnings. You'd stand at the edge of plans, waiting for a nod, a green light, a sign that you'd finally be ready. You learned to live in pregame. The checklist made you feel safe, but safety was a silence that slowly suffocated you. One morning you noticed time slipping like sand. You dropped the checklist on the floor, not because you had every answer, no, because you were done asking others to decide your timing. You started, small, clumsy, terrifying. First step, you picked a calendar and circled a date. Second step, you told someone that you were starting. Third step, you made the tiniest promise and kept it. The momentum began like a whisper. It grew. You felt the difference between permission and action. Permission is external. Action is yours. One requires waiting. The other requires courage. You chose the latter, and that choice changed the soundtrack of your life. Silence turned to rhythm. Doubt became questions you answered with movement. You felt alive in ways listless readiness never allowed. You thought nerves would disappear if you waited. They didn't. They shifted. They multiplied. Permission was a mirage. People you admired didn't hold a seal of approval before they leapt. They had no oracle to say go. They had stubbornness. They had routines. You start to notice patterns. Those who waited longest were often the ones with the thickest excuses. Those who started had strange little rituals, a fixed wake-up time, a notebook, a stubborn refusal to explain themselves. You stole their methods. You built scaffolding that didn't need anyone's consent. The scaffolding was simple: a time block, a single task, a public announcement. You learned to force the first draft, to ship imperfectly, to stop editing in the dark and finish in the light. Waiting felt like strategy. It was procrastination in a disguise. You call it what it is: fear looking for validation. You began to say no to that voice, not with perfect courage, with consistent steps. A line was forming between the life you imagined and the one you lived. You crossed it slowly, and the crossing taught you to move even when you trembled. Action is an economy. You exchange small tokens of discomfort for progress. You invested minutes. You suffered through awkward conversations. You failed fast and cataloged lessons. You didn't wait for permission to learn how to fail. You built a feedback loop. Do, watch, adjust, repeat. This loop was your new religion. You scheduled micro-wins. 15 minutes of writing, one cold pitch, one messy prototype. These felt insignificant. They were not. They added like interest, slow compounding. You started tracking time, not inspiration. Impromptu brilliance was unreliable. Consistency was predictable and brutal and honest. It kept you humble. It kept you moving. You found allies in public accountability. A friend who asked you the question, "What did you do this week?" You hated that question when you failed. You cherished it when you answered with a yes. Permission had been community. Action made it accountability. You learned to reframe criticism. It's not permission denied. It's data delivered. You used it. You cut the parts that slowed you down. You kept what accelerated you. Little spikes of progress became a new identity. You were someone who started. The first failures arrived like thunder. They were loud. They were humiliating. You had imagined success would taste sweeter. Instead, you tasted grit. A deal fell through. A post got no traction. You cried in the bathroom, and then you went back to work. This is the anatomy of learning. You stopped waiting for validation after failure. You found it inside the persistence to try again. Failure stopped meaning you were broken. It started meaning you were trying. You learned to debrief with precision. What did you control? What did you not? Which assumptions collapsed? What could you test next? You made smaller bets. You short-circuited catastrophic stakes. You could breathe between failures now. You also began to recognize that some doors would never open. And that was fine. Not every rejection required a comeback. Some were redirections. You learned to let dead ends be directions. You became ruthless with comfort. You removed it like a tumor. You prioritized friction that forged you. You stopped seeking permission to be inconvenienced for your future. Identity is the real battlefield. Permission asking was a habit of a version of you who feared being big. You rewired that. You started saying sentences differently. I am the kind of person who finishes projects. I am the kind of person who shows up even when unsure. Language shifted behavior. Labels became weapons. You stopped waiting for titles. You started earning them silently. Occupation followed action, not the other way around. The world began to treat you differently. Not because you were louder, because you were consistent. People started to count on you. Opportunities arrived with friction measured by your willingness. You were offered more if you were known for delivering. You refused comfort disguised as permission. You forgave yourself for messy starts. You kept a ledger of attempts, not approvals. Every attempt was an investment in identity. You were no longer a person who waited. You were the person who began. Momentum is both subtle and savage. Once you start, doors you couldn't force begin to hang ajar. Not all of them open fully, but they open enough for you to slip through. People who once asked you to justify your choices began asking your advice. You became a reference point. You noticed new kinds of courage, staying the course when nothing seems to happen. You learned to celebrate invisible progress, the hours where only you witnessed the work. You learned to measure in months and years. Instant validation was a liar. Depth was honest. You had fewer excuses. You had more responsibility. That's the trade-off. The voice that once demanded permission now noticed that you didn't need it. It quieted. Sometimes it still whispers. You don't panic. You schedule action. You honor the small rituals that keep you starting every day. You protect time like it's currency, because now it buys you growth. This is your manifesto now. You don't wait for the world to certify your readiness. You create conditions. You begin with what you have. You are allowed to be unpolished. You are allowed to fumble. You are required to continue. You make tiny promises and keep them. You keep a record of attempts, not approvals. You learn from failure instead of memorializing it. You choose action over permission every single morning. And on the days you falter, you return to one rule. Do one small thing. Show up. That one small thing compounds. It collects into a life. You are not waiting for permission anymore. You are waiting for the person you became by doing the work. That person is here. Start again. Start now.